What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I'm here to break down the Green Wave's thrilling 30-28 win over the Rice Owls to make them 7-1 on the year, undefeated in conference play, 1-0 on the week, and continuing their undefeated road streak. Again, if you're a fan out there looking for the perfect game from Tulane or just this absolute show of dominance, well, yeah, then you might be a little disappointed in the outcome. And in terms of continuing to say that this game was a tale of two halves, I'm sure that that's to a degree getting frustrating for Tulane fans. And I think a lot of this is just settling into the expectations of expecting your team to win, and not just that, but win in an incredibly convincing manner. And I think the perception of what a convincing manner is differs. Again, if you're looking at this from a scoreboard perspective, which I do get from the poll voting perspective of, how many of these pollsters are watching the games, or are they really only looking at the end score? Well, you can't play a football game or a season at that based on whether or not you think the college football playoff selection committee is going to look at your 2-point victory and not look at the game itself and just kind of write you off based on that. I mean, that really has nothing to do with the game of football, the season, the goals set by a team. And in terms of dominating this matchup, upon rewatch, I feel, again, a lot better about this game than you do in real time, mainly because obviously you know what the outcome's going to be. So it's a lot easier to kind of get through those struggles. But in terms of having a dominating first half performance, Tulane came out and were just absolutely firing on all cylinders with that. And Rice is a team that was outscoring their opponents 90-13 in the first quarter. That is, a ridiculously wild margin, and they can do it in under a minute with 2 pass plays for 30-second, 78-yard touchdown drive. They had 3 in under a minute in their first half against Tulsa, and then their final 2 drives were 7 and 8.5 minutes or something. I know Tulsa's not the best barometer at this point, considering what SMU did to them while Tulane was playing Rice, but just looking at JT Daniels, looking at the fact that Luke McCaffrey is definitely as advertised, and he's one of 4 or 5 legitimate receiving options, and that's without getting to their tight end group, who they didn't really use that much at the beginning of the game, used them a lot in motion, and then on several of those second half touchdown drives, all of a sudden it was these guys that hadn't caught a pass at all in this game. And then Dean Connors, their running back, who they use as a receiver and have a lot of those empty formation sets. That was definitely hard for Tulane to handle. They also have that 2 running back committee with both of those guys being able to credibly rush the football, and Tulane outrushed them 194 rushing yards to 82. And honestly, there are going to be games where at the end of the day, you need a quarterback that can drive you down the field when need be. Well, you got exactly that, and not just 1, but 2 halves here in Houston. And again, if we're going to kind of nitpick things, let's look at the drive against Memphis heading into halftime. I know a lot of people were angry that Tulane just kind of let the clock run down. Well, here you have it on their final drive of the half, after the defense held them to 3 3-and-outs on their first 4 possessions. Yeah, they allowed 1 touchdown in the first half. They started and went 3-and-out, 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 and then an interception. They had 3 pass breakups on third down on all those 3-and-outs by Lance Robinson, who had a very key third down pass breakup later in the game. Kentrell Webb had one, and AJ Hampton as well. And then that interception came on third down by DJ Douglas. That's 3 3-and-outs in 5 possessions and an interception, and then just allowing 1 touchdown to a team, again, that is outscoring opponents heading into this matchup 90-13 in the first half. And you saw them adjust in that interception play. They brought in dime defense. It made a really big difference. But again, it was just a tall task for a team that has credible receivers. They spread the ball out to 9 different guys. They doubled the time of possession in the first half. And everything really looked like it was going fine. And here's where I kind of get to the, frustration about the difference in a tale of two halves, if you will, is the psychology of injury to me. Jaquan Jackson, when he went out at that point in the game, Tulane was really driving down the field at that point. That was the missed field goal by Valentino Ambrosio on a 29-yarder, and he made 3 for over 40 yards. Now, obviously, every kick is, it's not a 50-50 technical chance, but, there's nothing to say that he missed that because that was a drive where Jaquan Jackson got hurt in, but it's also hard for me to ignore that he made a 44-yarder, something like a 43 and a 42-yarder at other points of the game, including, again, on that incredible hurry-up offense at the end of the first half by Tulane. in just 3 plays for 25 yards with 16 seconds left on the clock. But they were driving that whole game. They were spreading the ball around, and a lot of that was going to Jaquan Jackson. And on what would have been, a touchdown past him in the end zone, he goes out for a long time and is not moving. That's scary. It's just, I don't really know what to even say about it. It happened to Deuce Watson, the Cotton Bowl. This one just really felt like it went on for a long time, and it weighed on my heart the whole game, even seeing him back on the sideline for that second half. And just, again, it's hard for me to ignore the psychology of that on them just missing that 29-yard field goal. But again, they bounced back, and when they needed to, they held really convincing drives and basically put the clamp down on Rice in the second half. So I'll go through that. But when you're comparing it to, I think, those last couple of games where, they allowed Memphis to score 21 unanswered points, there was a lot of breakdowns in coverage, and that you could definitely get concerned about. North Texas, you could look at the onside kick that they immediately recovered, had those 2 back-to-back touchdown drives. But the second half really kind of changed on that interception thrown by Michael Pratt. And it's weird because you almost forget about it in this game with everything that went on and how inconsequential it kind of felt in that moment. I mean, interceptions never seem inconsequential, but that's where the momentum swung. And rather than Tulane panic and try to outscore a team that, again, can either score in under a minute or hold the clamps down you for 8 7-minute drives, Tulane flipped the script on them and completely dominated, just in a way that doesn't end up scoring points, but ultimately wins you a football game. Now let's get to that second half. Something I forgot to mention too, which continued a lot through the second half and only grew stronger, was the good. The good is the offensive line. And that's including an injury to Josh Remitich during the game, which I think affected Tulane on a specific series. But the fact that they've been able to handle the injuries at guard and have the depth that they have, and whatever happens with Remitich, the fact that Prince Pines was available to play, they kept Shadre Hurst in, and that line has allowed, again, 194 rushing yards in this game, 153 by Mekhi Hughes, and just another clutch drive at the end of the game by Michael Pratt. He just continues to show that when it comes down to it, whatever he needs to get done, be it kill the clock in any way, shape, or form, even if it kills his stat sheet by taking those, runs for losses and tossing a legit sky ball up in the air that had a strategy to it, all of those things really came together. And I think that was one of the stronger halves for Michael Pratt. But it did just feel like when they lost Jaquan Jackson, the shuffling of personnel took a little bit to kind of get going there. So, Rice opens out of halftime, and they go on one of their signature 7 and 16-minute touchdown drives, 12 plays for 75 yards. What stuck out to me on that drive was that they really started to use, again, tight ends that just hadn't been thrown to all game long, back-to-back receptions by them, and getting really creative with their short yardage packages. Tulane uses the Wildcat quite a bit, but the way that Rice was trotting out multiple running backs out there, and then would have Dean Connors go from, a 2 running back set out into the flat for a quick pass, really creative packages by Rice. And just honestly, they have a good scoring offense. It was really 2 missed tackles on the explosive run for a 21-yard gain on that play that, again, allowed Rice to kind of considerably drive down the field. Tackling definitely has to clean up for Tulane, but that was really the only time in that drive, and really up until that point in the game where that really stuck out to me. So Rice scores a touchdown. Again, it was 27-7 at half, so 27-14. And what does Tulane do? Unfortunately, that's when the interception happens by Michael Pratt. That drive was a little mystifying to me. I just went back and charted who was in for that series. And when I was talking about losing Jaquan Jackson, they ran the ball quite a bit. We only had, that really quick field goal, 2 or 3 play drive to end the half. And then, one prior where he threw a touchdown pass to Alex Bauman and it ended up working out. But the passing game was definitely a lot more there in the first half. That interception drive was also the one where Josh Remitich went down. Again, Trey Tuggle played really well in his role, but just a lot of moving parts going on at once. And Bryce Bohannon and Dante Fleming were out there for a lot of that series. And I mean, we've seen Bryce Bohannon in the past. We've seen Dante Fleming. I don't think Bryce Bohannon has a reception this year. Dante Fleming has 4. 3 of those came against Nichols, none since, and then 1 in the South Alabama opening game. So with this type of situation to only kind of have those guys out there as options. He threw an incompletion to Bryce Bohannon. You assume if Jaquan Jackson was the running that route, he probably would have gotten there in time. And then his decision to throw it to Keys. I have to just credit their safety. Really great decision to break on that ball. He was up there and you had Dante Fleming running that really deep route. Most of the time you keep your safety on the deep route, but I think, probably saw that on film, probably saw a little bit in Michael Pratt's body movements, and just understanding again that in this situation I guess it was an earned first down. They had just completed a third down, but who's his go-to guy? At this point, it's going to be Lawrence Keys, especially when he was out there with, again, just Dante Fleming and then tight ends as options. So do I blame Michael Pratt for wanting to go to the guy that, even though they've had some disconnection issues here and there, has been one of the more reliable guys, over a deep throw? And again, at that point that he threw the ball, that safety hadn't really made his break yet. And he just did a really, really good job of pursuing the football and taking that chance and just driving down and breaking on the ball. So there's your one bad decision. Unfortunately, again, that decision led to a very large return on that interception where Rice only had to drive 3 yards to score a touchdown. So points off turnovers, that's definitely something that Tulane likes to be on the winning side of. But again, it's really hard for me to look at the defense in any type of way, even compared to, again, the onside kick situation last weekend, where they still at least had a chance to make a few stops. There's only so much you can do when, they basically are in the red zone after you just spent almost 7.5 minutes on the field prior to that. And then Tulane's offense goes out there and they go 3 and out for a punt. The rushing game was kind of holding up there, and then Michael Pratt got sacked, but it just, again, sorry, I'm just getting back to where I am on my notes. They did put Keith Brown in that series, but then you didn't really see Lawrence Keys. It was Bryce Bohannon out there. So again, maybe they're trying to save the receivers. Maybe they're just trying to do a little bit of confusion there, but on the third down where, Mekhi Hughes did have a reception, which was good to see. And he was really close to getting that third down too. It was 3rd and 14. He got 12 yards on that one. There weren't really any routes that it looked like were over the down marker. It looked like Alex Bauman kind of got stuffed. The one guy who had made it over, I can't remember who it was. He was covered, if not double covered. So you gave Mekhi Hughes a chance to make a play in space, and he got pretty close to it. And decision-making does not happen in a vacuum. And, I think back to earlier in the game where there was a pass interference on the play, but they went for it on 4th down relatively early on. Chris Brazel ended up drawing a pass interference flag, and I was surprised that they did that, but they were comfortably controlling the ball and the score, all of that at this point. Now, time's not on your side, and the momentum has swung to the other side. I think that just plays a little bit into decision-making on whether or not to go for it, and field position at that. This, to me, is where the defense earned their flowers, and this matchup being markedly different from the last couple of games. Again, the one against Memphis, they allowed 21 unanswered points, and then they were able to hold on at the end. North Texas tied the score, and Tulane had to drive and score a touchdown in order to win that game and still make a stop on defense. And I think Rice is just a better football team than North Texas was. And even though they had a really strong offense on North Texas, I just felt like the receivers and the options, and that's also credit to the coaching staff and the coordinators over Rice. This was definitely an easier said than done task. I'm pretty sure JT Daniels averaging over 300 yards a game. The only other game he was held to under 200 yards was in their first game, which was a loss to Texas. I believe it was 37-10. So to hold him to 189 passing yards while Michael Pratt had 263, that says a lot when you consider that Jaquan Jackson went down. The receiving game shuffled around a little bit in the meantime. Meanwhile, they had none of those problems over on Rice's side. But again, the play this is where I'm talking about, where first off, I have to shout out Ethan Hudak for the huge special teams tackle preceding this 3-and-out drive that I'm about to get to, because Tulane punts the ball and he just tore down and absolutely took down their returner. DJ Douglas had a similar really hard hitting tackle earlier in the game, but long snappers and Hudaks, let's freaking go. So Rice begins at their 24 and Tulane holds them to 3-and-out. This was, again, after allowing those 2 touchdown drives, I say, I guess, in air quotes, because yeah, the 7-minute drive, that's on the defense. But when they're in the red zone with just 3 yards necessary to get a touchdown. Only so much I'm going to hold against them. This was huge to me, where again, Tulane punts, score at this point is 27-21, and you're getting kind of closer to that. Is this going to happen again at the end of the game, especially for a team in Rice known to dominate in the fourth quarter again against Tulsa? I keep saying against Tulsa with the disclaimer that I don't know what to say about Tulsa at this point, but still, those 2 8-minute drives at the end of the game, it's not the first time that they've done that. I mean, they did it to start the second half at that. And so I definitely think this was a game of having just that one more possession, and more importantly, having the final possession. And so not having to play kind of score catch up in the meantime, because if, let's say, Rice scores there, then it's 28-21. And Tulane ends up kicking a field goal on the next play or the next drive. But, that completely changes the decision-making if now they're playing from a loss. So for the defense to go out there, stuff the run, and then have another pass breakup on third down by Lance Robinson. I mean, again, that is the 4th of the day, his 2nd of the day. And those are all on third downs. And then DJ Douglas's interception on third downs. Say what you want about this defense, but they make the critical stops when it matters. There's a question of maybe they should have rushed more a little bit, but I just have to emphasize how many times when you have an empty set out there, having 5 legitimate options at receiver, and they have a genuine depth chart at all their wide receiver roles. I remember earlier in that week, Willie Fritz had compared their receiving corps quite a bit like Tulane, saying that Luke McCaffrey kind of had the speed of Lawrence Keys, and Rawson McNeil, that size and length of Chris Brazel. And that's not including the 2 tight ends that caught passes in this game, several other wide receivers, and those running backs at that who were credible pass catchers. So again, this was an easier said than done outing for Tulane, but that to me is where you look at a make or break situation for a team, where your offense has come out of halftime, they've thrown an interception, then they go 3 and out. You've now allowed 2 touchdowns after only allowing 1 in the first half. That song is starting to play in your head again of, is this just kind of what's going to be going on for Tulane for the end of the year? And then, they go down and get a field goal. I know that's not super exciting. To me, a 43-yard field goal is incredibly exciting. And again, I just felt like personnel had really worn down in this game. There was a point where Michael Pratt's hand was bleeding. It just felt like everyone was getting really bruised and battered. I had wanted to look more into their turf in order to do this kind of turf report here. All I will say is it was really weird. It was something called roof light or something, but it had these little brown pellets that looked kind of like mouse turds, for lack of a better term. It was really compact in, and it just felt like it was hard to get any traction. I mean, I was literally on the ground trying to stick my finger in it, and it felt like you really had to dig in order to, I was trying to simulate cleats getting into the ground. It just stuck out that on both sides, there seemed like a lot of slippage, a lot of non-contact injuries at that. And it's just hard for me to ignore in terms of that affecting this game. But to not get on that tangent, I unfortunately didn't have time to do that because I really wanted to look at this matchup. But that field goal drive, it's 8 plays, 3 minutes and 49 seconds, and they close out the third quarter with that. So you have a really clutch play in Valentino Ambrosio at this point, and that's why I go back to that missed field goal, really thinking that was just, it was a really bad vibe at that moment. Where, I mean, again, I will point to the fact that Jaquan Jackson was just not moving for several minutes. And that, again, it's hard to not think that weighs on people, but Valentino Ambrosio, man, he won Louisiana Sports Writer Association Player of the Week, the American Conference Player of the Week. He scored 3 field goals, all over 40 yards. That's 9 points in a 2-point game, not even including his extra points. I mean, it's safe to say he arguably was, and Steve and I, in trying to give our players of the game at the end of the game, his was Mekhi Hughes. I'm pretty sure mine was Devin Deal, if I'm remembering correctly. But if we had a third player, we really wanted to give it to Valentino Ambrosio, especially to be able to do that after missing an easy field goal. There has not been a kicker, I think, like this since Cairo Santos for Tulane fans. And to kick like that in the wind, in these situations, and when your team needs it, that is super important to me. So we go into the fourth quarter, and yes, Rice has another touchdown at this point. The offense that they ran on that touchdown drive, looked a little more like what I was expecting them to run, where there was a lot of plays when I was looking at them in prior matchups where they used Luke McCaffrey very similar to Yokeith Brown as kind of that jet sweep. Sometimes he was a decoy, sometimes he would get the pass, but just using him a lot in motion and kind of as that rusher. It finally did that on that drive and had him out in space, and he had a 16-yard pickup on first down. Then they just kind of ate up Tulane's soft zone. Again, it's a question of should Tulane have been playing a little more man-heavy coverage. It's really hard to cover all of those receivers one-on-one. They still proved able to stuff the run game. And that was just an incredible catch, too, by Luke McCaffrey in the end zone. His helmet comes off. I mean, that's an NFL-type throw and an NFL-type catch. And it's one that I was more expecting to see a lot more than what we actually saw in that matchup. And then this is where the game really comes down to. You relied on your defense to make the stop, the week prior. And they made their necessary stop prior to that final touchdown drive. I know a lot of people are angry that Tulane didn't go for that touchdown at the end of the game. I think it's so much cooler and so much gutsier and says so much more about what you think about your team to say, I'm comfortable holding this 2-point lead. Let's just run out this clock and just go the heck home. That's really what they did there. I mean, they started that final drive and it took 8 minutes off the clock. I don't have the exact time of when that drive began, but they started with about 8 minutes and something left on the clock. That drive ends with 4 seconds left, no timeouts for Rice. And yeah, there is always something that can happen on the final play, but he's not Caleb Williams. And the field position they got as a result of what Tulane did at the end of the game pretty much made it impossible for them to do anything. And then credit to Devin Deal for tackling the crap out of Luke McCaffrey and effectively ending that football game on that 4-second play. But Tulane's final drive, to me, this is where grit, championship teams, what have you, you need to be able to dominate like that. They went and ran the football down the throats of Rice. And I just, again, to have Mekhi Hughes be the way that he is, it shouldn't be this way. Tulane shouldn't be able to get away with having years of just these productive running backs, but Willie Fritz likes to run the football. That's something that is a moniker of his coaching philosophy. And so it's also somewhat unsurprising that that's a position they're really looking to have that strong depth at. And again, seeing Shawty Clayton-Johnson in this matchup too, because Tulane has their running back one, and you got that benefit of him not being running back one and having all of the carries for the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. But you definitely don't really know who is behind him on the depth chart, which also is a huge point of advantage, especially when they've used all those guys in a lot of different ways. Shedro Lewis was actually a lot more successful between the tackles last week when they used him than he'd been all season. We only saw them use Mekhi Hughes and barely Shawty Clayton-Johnson in this game, but they used Shawty Clayton-Johnson often as a receiver. He had a catch in this game, as did Mekhi Hughes. And then you have Arnold Barnes, who's just that bruised runner up the middle. But so is Mekhi Hughes. And just his ability to break those tackles, it just gets more incredible by the week. So to have a running back who can run and close games like that, and have a quarterback who can be as clutch as Michael Pratt. If you go and look at him on that final drive, he is poised, he's calm, his technique, his footwork, his release, it's all so there. And sure, we can have a conversation about, well, where was it in the third quarter, this, that, and the other. I think you can have a valid discussion about the fact that Tulane struggled to play 4 full quarters of a football game, but the fourth quarter is the most important quarter of that football game. And if that's the way that Tulane closes out games, I'm okay with it. And it's just, again, hard for me to ignore the psychology of injury in all of that. He hits third down conversion first by Chris Brazzell. They started off running the football. Chris Brazzell had a huge third down conversion earlier in this game, drew the pass interference on a 4th down earlier in this matchup. And I'll be the first to say it. I didn't think that Chris Brazzell was big enough to do anything. This was last year. And credit to him to bulking up the training staff at Tulane, Kurt Hester. It's just impossible to ignore now that these guys get 1 year under the belt with Kurt Hester. And I remember Chris Brazzell came out for training camp and I was just like, oh, okay. Well, it looks like he's at least put on 10 pounds here, similar to what Deuce Watts looked like last year when he came back and just looked like a completely different guy and played like a completely different guy. You are seeing Chris Brazzell be a legitimate physical contested catch guy. And that's really saying a lot. So he gets that first third down reception. Then Alex Bauman and Keith Brown were the other pass options on that play. But just again, to go back to those drives where things weren't really working. I don't really know why Bryce Bohannon and Dante Fleming were kind of the options on that play, but Lawrence Keys, Keith Brown, and Alex Bauman, that's still good enough to get you down the field. And then just continuing to run the ball. They got a huge fourth down conversion by Michael Pratt where Mekhi Hughes had a really big block on that play. And then this is where, sure, you could go for the touchdown here. This is where Tulane decided to effectively run around in circles. And so, yeah, that first snap, and it's weird. I know that people were talking about if there were clock issues going on, and watching it on TV, the clock didn't necessarily start when Michael Pratt snapped most of those runs. And what he was doing was, again, kind of taking those kneel downs for losses, but he was running around in the backfield for a solid 2 or 3 seconds every single time. And it was like the play clock took that much time in order to get with the program. And then, they thought that Rice had called a timeout. And so the Tulane ended up calling a timeout. The play clock kept getting reset. I mean, there is a clip of Willie Fritz talking to the ref and not saying nice things at that. I mean, just the end of the clock management on the literal game clock side was so bizarre that it's hard to kind of figure out what was going on there. But they get down to the red zone and there's 58 seconds left in this game. And let's just talk about the fact that there were 8 minutes left in the game when they started that drive. Again, Tulane's red zone offense, could it improve? Sure. Decision making, not throwing interceptions, going 3 and out, having better halftime adjustments on offense, sure. But when you tell your offense to drive down the field and just handle this football game in and of itself, and they were able to do that for 8 minutes, again, and that's against a team that does this to their opponents like it's nothing. And it's just very demoralizing for a team to just be completely shut out of having a chance at all, especially when the third quarter for them really went well, all things considered. And then by the time they run around and do all of that, there's 11 seconds left on the clock. And then they throw a pass on fourth down and it was coached. I just want to say that too. This is all not coincidental. The fact that Tulane was able to do the hurry up at the end of the second half and kick that field goal, they were practicing hurry up offense like it was their freaking job all week. I know they do it all the time, but it was just the franticism of it was very similar to that end of the half field goal drive. And then towards the end of the game here, where you know how to run off the clock by having your running back or your quarterback just kind of run around. And then on that fourth down play, the clock doesn't stop until the ball hits the ground. So what you're supposed to do, and what Michael did to perfection, is literally launch it full send into the air to see as much time can be taken off the clock as possible. And they got the ball back with 4 seconds left on like their Tulane's 14 or 24 or something. I mean, again, it would have been one hell of a play. And it's not impossible, but let's say Tulane goes for the field goal there. Rice is going for, the touchdown either way at that point with the amount of time and no timeouts left on the clock, but Tulane made them use all of their timeouts. So they didn't have the ability to drive down the field and kick a field goal to win this game. They only had a chance on one play. And just again, to go back to the question of should Tulane have kind of gone for the kill shot? Well, let's say one of those runs broke free. Again, there was still 58 seconds left on the clock when they started doing all those kneel downs. So would you have preferred them to kneel it down once, kneel it down twice, and then run for it? Would you have preferred them to try to run for it on first down? I mean, we've seen wild things go on in games where you try to get fancy and then things happen. And a fumble in the end zone, a touchback, we've seen happen quite literally last week against North Texas. It's just, I think the risk of a turnover and a potential return on that, giving them that necessary field position, the chances of that, I agree with how Tulane ended this game. It's very, again, I guess conservative, what have you, but not really when you look at how they played this whole game. I just conservative in terms of, again, style points and giving them a chance to quote unquote win with a field goal. But there was nothing they could have done up until that point. And Tulane literally ran all of those minutes off the clock just by kind of running around in circles. And it speaks a lot to, I just think, the team mentality of Tulane, where Michael Pratt's looking to go to the NFL draft this year. I'm sure a nice, cool touchdown at the end of the game, especially against an offense like Rice's, would have felt nice on his stat sheet. But instead, he takes those runarounds for losses and just launches the ball up into the air full send. Michael Pratt, to me, is one of the most mentally tough quarterbacks that I've ever had the pleasure to see, if not the most mentally tough. And just the way he responds after interceptions, the way that he adjusts, and you saw him use his legs in this game in a much smarter way than I think you ever have. Maybe it has finally kind of clicked with him, but there were plays where he would run out of bounds or slide. And I'm thinking, wow, great. In the past, they probably would have gotten the first down there, but at what expense kind of thing. So all of that to say, this game was a little more of a convincing win than I think people had an idea of. And I think it's just a question of whether or not you subscribe to going for it at the end of the game or really letting the clock run down to as little time as possible, giving them 4 seconds, having to drive 80 yards with no timeouts. I mean, you can maybe get 2 plays off if you're lucky. And now again, Tulane is 7-1, and that just shouldn't go under the radar here. I tweeted about this, where when I was at Tulane, they went 15-34. And most of those wins came in the year that they went to the New Orleans Bowl in 2013 with Curtis Johnson. And it was actually kind of a closer loss than you could kind of remember, but there was such a lost generation of Tulane fans. And I would consider myself in that generation. Neither of my parents, my dad went to Denton and then UVA for law school. My mom went to paralegal school. There was no college football team in our family at all growing up. I really followed the Saints and was just always into the NFL. And when I went to Tulane, they weren't really known for being a football school, and they were still at the Superdome when I first got there. I would be curious as to whether or not my trajectory there started 2 years later when Yeoman Stadium was built in 2014, what my kind of attendance over those 2 years would have been like. But what I can say is I don't remember how many games I went to my senior year. Is definitely more than the 2 I went to in the first 2 years there. I was abroad for Yeoman's inaugural season, but I think you're seeing just a huge resurgence of Tulane fandom. I've met so many kids at all of these games where it's their first Tulane game. And that's really where generations of fandom are built, especially when you have this lost generation. And that being said, the amount of people that, were in my classes and my sororities that I was acquaintances with that have reached out and either said they were coming down for a game, that they've been following along Tulane football. And the fact that Tulane is on national television every single week this year. They were on ESPN Plus when they played Kansas State last year, and that was the American Athletic and Big 12 champions playing. Tulane is the hunted, and I know that that's probably getting old for people at this point, but the fact of the matter is they're getting every opponent's best game plan, but they're also getting, I think, a little more of a national spotlight this year, and it's safe to say that they're handling it really well. When you look at these games, it's a tale of a little bit of a momentum swing here or there, and it's not so much just this kind of wild things going wrong, but when they need to be clutch, when they have to pull it together, and when the defense has to just make that one final stop, both sides of the ball are able to do that. And this is 3 games in a row now where it would have been way easier to crumble and have things fall down a hill than it would be to really grind these matchups out. Now Tulane's looking at, again, credibly not just playing in, but hosting the conference championship game. I mean, this season is theirs for the taking at this point. And to go 7-1, who cares if it was 2 points, 1 point, if it was in overtime? The overtime loss in Houston last year, sure, it was Kai Horton, but I don't remember there being this much discussion about the point margin. And again, if you're looking for a team that is going to run up the score for just score's sake, you're looking at the wrong football coach and the wrong philosophy in running the football and just dominating the time of possession. Tulane won the time of possession. They won the football game, and they're 1-0 now on this week and looking to go to ECU and cap off another consecutive road victory. They're in a very good position. And one that, again, if you just look back on when we entered this season, who's going to be starting for Nick and Dorian? Oh, Corey Platt went down. Well, these linebackers have really stepped up, these defensive backs. And again, just the plays on third down, the interceptions, the pass breakups. It's a play-making defense, one that gets sacks when it needs to. Devin Deal, shout out again, my player of the week. They can do it anyway. It's just not going to be pretty. And that might just be something that we all need to get used to. And if that's what comes with the 1-0, then I will take it. I'm looking forward to be traveling again this weekend and getting some insight about ECU. because it feels like it's been forever since Tulane's played them. Even though you could say that for all of these opponents, it's kind of nice to have an old familiar in ECU, given that Tulane has played them every single year I've been there, and they are 1-1. So time to go 1-0 in Greenville. And with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday.